Welcome to another episode of The Kitchen Table, which is our podcast here at Lake Avenue Community Church in Pasadena. The kitchen table is a metaphor for our family conversation where we all come together. As members of family, we talk about stuff and we also get to introduce each other in a way to the bigger community out there. And today I have Kelley Williams here, and I'm going to introduce her in a very special way. Because Kelley and I informally met around 3 years ago. I was starting launching a ministry called the Mosaic Course here at Lake Avenue Church 3 years ago. At that time, it was just almost nothing. It was just a humble beginning of something which eventually becoming bigger and bigger now. But at that time, our common friend Jerome said, hey, I want to introduce you to this amazing poet called Kelley Williams, and our event should start with her poetry. And I always loved poetry. So I thought, okay, this is a great idea. Let's do this. And so Kelley did this opening poem. So I want you to listen to this poem by Kelley, Kelley's recitation of the poem at the opening event of the Mosaic Course. And that will be your first introduction to Kelley.
I look towards the skies with aimless intent, wishing your words would rain from the heavens and spill over into my soul. I need to feel you, Lord. Receive the liberation of your love, but your silence sinks me deeper. I'm trying to find you. I will my eyes to open to see your reality and your truth. But the anger like fog blinds me. I perch my ears towards the invisible winds, hoping to hear your whisper, but there's nothing. Only the roaring thunders of the world screams. Their cries like bellows seem muted when believers refuse to hear. And their compassion leaks like the blood they watch others bleed. They too cannot see, Lord. Where is our love when hearts freeze? I'm swallowed up by the intermingling of sin and religion in the depths of my soul's core. I scream out to you, Lord, where are you? Who are you? Then, like a warmth that settles into a frozen body, he speaks. Beloved, I am the one who weeps. I am the one who saw grief consume Mary's eyes and sensed the numbness in her body as she cried. My heart shattered and my soul broke as she fell to my feet, and crowds of Jews continued to weep. I felt their suffering. I felt the burden of their anguish, so I cried out to my Father and called Lazarus out by name. You see, their pain was my pain. Beloved, I am the one who saves. I am the one who spoke on behalf of the woman enslaved by a mob of men with self-righteous indignation who dragged her by her hair, discarded her to the dirt, their treatment of what they believed was fair. There I kneeled, wrote in the very dirt where they had veered. With eyes bowed, they read. Though convicted by man, condemned to death, she stood, with no man left to cast his stone. I saw her turmoil. I saw her worth. In the beauty of her watered eyes, right down into her soul, with love I freed her, rescued her from death. She, my beloved, was able to walk away from her brokenness. Beloved, I am the one who cares. I am both the man left on the side of the road and the hands of the Samaritan. who with heart wide open and compassion in his eyes saw the wounded man as I. When priest and Levite abandoned him, he bandaged his wounds, poured out his own oil and wine, took his own donkey to rest the man upon, paid and looked after him at the inn when no one else would. This Samaritan man loved and cared for him. Don't you know, beloved, I am both the broken and the healed. I am the forgotten and the remembered. I am the poor and the rich. I am the man and the woman. I am the Syrian and the American. I am the deserted and the found. I am the one who sees and the one who is seen. So let your love reach the earth's core. Let no one be left in need. Let there be no one you do not see. Beloved, you belong to one another as much as you belong to me. Open your eyes with your heart and believe that when you really see each other, you will see me.
Wow, Kelley. What an honor to have you here at our podcast. As I'm listening to this, you wrote this 3 years ago, at least you recited it 3 years ago. But it almost sounds like this was written today morning. That's the beauty of when poetry becomes prophecy. Can you walk me through the process and how do you, when you hear this, even though it's your poem, sometimes it might hit you as new. And I would like to hear your thought process as your own poem, recited back to you through this machine after 3 years. How do you feel it in the world in which we live, where we are going through a biological pandemic, there is a racial pandemic, there is tension, which is only increasing. So how does this poem ministering to you personally, to the writer? Yeah, let's start with that.
Yeah, it's well, thank you first for having me. It's definitely an honor. It's strange. I've reread a lot of my poems before, but to hear it after all these years is an interesting experience. I think as I was listening, I thought, wow, I have many of those same exact feelings today, and yes, that is how I feel, and I know that place of despair, and oftentimes I write because I'm in an emotion or I'm trying to work through feelings and trying to understand the situation that I'm in. And I remember now the name of the poem is Jesus. And I think we all have those periods of, I think they call them nights of the dark soul or just these periods where we go through unbelief where we just feel like God is a little bit distant. And the line, of I'm being infuriated by the intermingling of sin and religion is always a tension that is in the forefront of my experience as a believer. And that too in today's era is what is so aggravating. And it's easy to want to walk away or to get frustrated. And you're like, God, who are you in all this? Who are you in this pandemic? Where are you in this pandemic? And just those biblical stories that show the characteristics and the humanity of God through Jesus. It's like, right, that's who my Lord is. And it gave me, I guess, sense of grounding, of just like, okay, and rooting of like, this is why I believe in, this is whom I believe in, and this is what my God does. My God meets me and meets us in our pain. He doesn't run away from it or doesn't address it. He comes right in it, right at the nick of time. And that's kind of the feeling that I had through that.
Yeah, and poetry becomes a tool for that. The idea, I always respect people with the ministry of logos, the word. The word, even though I work in different field, and we are living in a visual culture, so to speak, but still the word, the logos, which is actually even more powerful than has a particular way of humanizing some of the spiritual problems. And as a pastor, I tend to spiritualize issues because that's what my training is. But then people like you come along to say that, spirituality is important. You are a Christian, and but at the same time, how do you from the spiritualizing an issue to humanizing an issue, which we talked about before this interview, and then the logos becomes a tool for that. So I really appreciate the way, and also I see if you read the book of poems in the Bible, Psalms, right, and almost all of them sounds like your poem because it's not like somebody singing hallelujah, right? The Psalms is always this questions of skepticism and where are you, Lord? And I can't hear you. And as much as I don't like some of this stuff as a pastor, no, what do you mean? Like, God is here. No, but in the real human situations, that it doesn't. So what is your process? And I'm very intrigued as a poet. How do you express, does it start with the pain and then you're going to vocalize it? Or how do you write a poem?
They're different entry points. Sometimes I'm just given a line. It starts with a line, and I have to write it down. Like, I have to write it down. And then I start writing it down, and then it just flows from there. It's just like, and then I'm just stuck in that world. So I've written. That's happened when I've, and oftentimes I think it does start from intense emotion where it's like I'm there and I'm just trying to grapple it, and then all of a sudden there's a line. And I write it down. So I've done that like outside in my backyard with my phone or on a train. And so when it hits, I need to write it down. But I love to write to music. So I'll play, either I'm listening to music or I find a song. I think I just write, and then a song just hits and feels that kind of captures the essence of the poem, and so I just listen to it over and over again as I'm writing, and finding the piece. And which is interesting. My best friend always says that she's like, it's funny the way you write, you're struggling, and then there's this turning point, and you have a solution, or you have a kind of enlightened aha moment, which is not intentional. I think it just kind of happens.
Yeah. And I'm coming from the world of storytelling, and in every story there has to be a redemption. We use the word redemption, which is even in Hollywood, it's a very Christian term, redemption, right? It is. But that's what even the Hollywood, where is the redemption comes in the scripture, right? In the script, right? Like something like that. So that's interesting. So you are not. Writing is one of the many things you do, right? So what else do you do? Like, you are in the creative field, and there are many talents. So,
I started off at a young age acting. I love to be on stage. I love, I did speech writing contests. And so I guess one of the weirdos, I really love to just I'd probably argue to say I feel more comfortable on stage and being very extroverted, though I have introverted tendencies as well. But so acting, and then I also dance. I love to dance. It's another form of expression and feeling emotion. But I think I'm kind of learning how all those three work together.
Yeah. So you mean acting, dancing, and writing, right?
Yes.
And one word for all of this coming together is a theater, right?
Yes.
And you are working for Pasadena Playhouse, which is probably the most iconic art center for our little town here. And what a privilege to have someone like you there as a Christian, and not necessarily working with people who may not necessarily agree with your convictions.
Right.
So how was that experience like working for Pasadena Playhouse?
Yeah, I've been more on the behind the scenes side, administrative side, which is interesting to see how the stories that are chosen or the artists that you work with. And being an artist, you're oftentimes in, communities where people aren't believers. And so you pick and choose, not pick and choose, I think you try to feel when it's okay to reveal yourself as a Christian. It's like, all right, I'm gonna let them know I'm a believer. But once you do, I always find that I've had good experiences. I think people have questions, good dialogue. But I find it's more so about how you say things, how you engage, more than what you're particularly saying, that you're not particularly using Christian language. But I'll say, when I go to church or, Resurrection Sunday, so they're, okay, so you're a believer. But and not necessarily, I think it's once that information comes out, it's like how now everything that I do is going to be seen through the lens of like, she's a believer. And so you're just aware. I'm just aware of like how I engage with people and the conversations that I engage in, the dialogues that I engage in, and and how that is a representation of who I represent as a believer.
And ultimately, I hope you won't disagree when I say that, there is a convergence in the way, whether you're a Christian or non-Christian, we are all, particularly as an artist, they are all exploring the meaning of life, right, in one way or the other. So there is a kinship, whether we buy into the same dogma or not.
Right.
So I hope you have seen some of that too, I guess. Yeah.
And it's interesting, everyone's origin stories or way. And I've had, some, I think it's been a blessing. God has really blessed me with good friends that are non-believers, because we can have those really hard conversations. So I've learned to, oftentimes you're listening. You're not so much, I will, I don't want to say press, but I will kind of, pry a little bit or just ask questions that I know are kind of agitate them a little bit. Because what I find with a lot of non-believers, a lot of them have been hurt by the church or by their family members who are believers. And so there's that trauma there. And so I'm empathetic of that, of like, okay, this isn't necessarily, 'cause sometimes there's a lot of anger, or they'll pry me a lot more than I will pry them, because I know that a lot of times they're coming from a place of hurt, and I'm like, I'm not necessarily coming from a place. I have my own pains and issues with the church, certainly.
Yeah.
But as an active believer, I find it more important to listen and to kind of hear what they have to say. And I will. So when I do say something, oftentimes it's like, okay. I'll take that into consideration,
Yeah, since you said you pry into,
Yeah.
so I wanted to pry into a little bit of your statement too. And is it okay for me to describe you as somebody who grew up in the church in a way, right?
Yes.
Like, and so what would you be in? I mean, we all have our own, because church, as even Jesus's church itself was not perfect, right? Out of the 12 people, one turned out to be like a real bad guy.
Right.
So there is no indictment against anything particular. But what would you consider something that really bothers you? Not necessarily about a particular church, but in general, I'm interested in learning as a pastor, so that I don't want to make that mistake. That's why I'm asking. I'm not prying. I'm just trying to learn.
Right. Yeah, and I for me, it's the lack of empathy. I think sometimes there's too much a lack of empathy, but also kind of running away from pain, uncomfortable conversations, or even the fact that we don't know. There are things that like I don't know what no one really knows what God feels about, like who does and who doesn't get into heaven. I mean, we can surmise from what we read, but it's not our decision. And I think, I think it's just the lack of empathy and humanity. Sometimes I'm just like, man, like, it's easy to, if you are not engaging with communities or people that are different from you, it's easy to judge them. It's easy to give an antidote for something you know nothing about, It's easy to blame, maybe this is like extreme example, but like a woman who's in prostitution, people just see this woman, but like that woman was a young girl who's probably sex trafficked or who was abused by the people in her life who should have loved her. And so, but if you don't know that or you haven't engaged with people like that, it's easy to say, well, this is a sin what you're doing, or how, it's, or to judge someone instead of saying, how did you get here? How did someone get here? And why do people make the decisions that they've made? And I just, I wish the church would listen more and engage more. I think, Christ said, we come together and we learn the word and we fill ourselves up, and then we go out into the world and we engage with people who are not like us, with people who don't know who God is. And because from then we will see it's complicated and it's messy, but God is right there. It can do some amazing, amazing things. But it's just the disconnect that the church has to the world. I think the church took, don't be in the world but not of the world a little bit too far. There's people who are Christians who only hang out with each other. And I'm like, that is not the point. You're going to be so blinded and have enough faith to be in the world and know that God and the Holy Spirit will keep you, and that it is okay. It's messy, and like I may slip up or fall, or there are conversations. There's brilliant minds out there, and so maybe you're like, oh, you're kind of questioning me to doubt, and I think it's important. You have to doubt. You have to go through a season of Jesus. If Jesus went 40 days, like being tempted by the devil himself, certainly we can go out into the world and be tempted as well and come out on the other side. To know that God wouldn't send you where he won't bring you out of. And that's what, aggravates me about the church is like, if you just did this, if you just took the spirit, I mean, God is a spiritual, like, I mean, you said earlier, you see things through a spiritual lens. That's what really all things are spiritual. And we are spiritual beings. And I think it's a song, we're spiritual beings going through a human experience. And so you have to trust the Spirit. And I think a lot of churches don't do that. I think they want to, they talk about it. But I'm like, I don't, like, it's the ways what you hear about the spiritual baptism and the way the Spirit moves and the miracles and the healing. I'm like, are we experiencing that? How often are we experiencing that? How often are we seeing that? And I think it could be done on a more massive scale, not through, I don't think it needs to be, recorded or shown on TV, but the lives that come in, the amount of people that can be healed, the droves of lives that can be saved are possible. And I know they're happening. I know that God is still alive and well. But there are places where I'm like, look at the crop. It's dry. It's been dry. I mean, the land is barren, and you're feeding it, chlorine water. Feed it actual minerally rich water, and that's what aggravates me.
Yeah. I don't want you to stop, Kelley. So the poetry was coming out without you knowing it. So I was just letting that creative process flow. But in a strange way, if you had asked me the same question, I would have given the same answer too. And, I transitioned into pastoring from a corporate world. And, I was always the other, the other side. And one other thing that fascinated me, attracted me to Christianity is the way that Jesus himself was the risk taker who blurred the line, right?
Right,
Because when he
right.
came, people had a clear understanding of, because you brought up the issue of prostitution.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, there was a very clear understanding of what adultery is.
Right.
Then Jesus said, but by the way, if you look at a woman
Mm-hmm.
and lust after her, you have already committed adultery.
Mm-hmm.
Then suddenly my understanding of adultery completely
Right.
messed up.
Right.
You know, that means I am an adulterer.
Right,
Everybody is an adulterer.
Right.
So what is adultery? Up until that time, everything was black and white.
Right.
Same thing with murder. You know, by the way, murder is wrong, right?
Right,
Jesus
right.
said. But if you call your friend
Yeah.
a fool, then you have committed murder. Then, I am a murderer too. So what is murder? What is that commandment? So it's funny, Jesus intentionally created, between the black and the white,
Yeah.
he created this messiness and it is, in so many ways, it's that risk-taking
Right.
in the spiritual realm is that
Right.
what attracted me to Jesus and Christianity and even to ministry. But then when you come to the other side, then no, we had to play it safe, right?
Right, right.
So it is that paradoxical tension, which is also reflected in your poetry, because when you really listen to your interpretation of that parable of the Good Samaritan in the poetry, when you said Jesus is that traveler who is on the road, but he is also the Samaritan who helps. So Jesus is the one who looks, and Jesus is also the one who is seen. See, that's the beauty of you expressing in simple sentence something which is very messy. That is essentially the messiness
Right.
explained in a poetry form, and your poem concludes with I may not repeat the same word the same way, but when you see the other, you see me, or something like that, right?
Yeah.
So give me a perspective on that as to how do we see the other, like the way God sees. Do you have any thoughts on that? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think to your point that like when Jesus, he was a troublemaker in that way, and to say, I think about that as like when you realize that we say it, we're all sinners, but when you really realize like not that far, I've killed people with my words, so how can I condemn this person, who has killed someone? And like you said, it's still wrong, but I think it's a manner. I think Jesus is speaking to, but have empathy that you are not much further from this person, that by the grace of God, you were born where you were born, in a place that has stability. You were born into a loving household by nothing that you've done, and so I think I think it's to see that God is, because from the beginning of time, it's God took his own image and made us, and so us isn't just Christians. Us is every human being, and I think that it's about not just saying like, and I'm helping, because he oftentimes says, when you let me you fed me in prison, and he references like I'm a part of these people, and I think he perhaps was speaking about when he died on the cross, he embodied all those experiences, and it's like I've been there. He's like and I think that, which is beautiful, which a lot of other religions don't have. Well, I mean, the ones that I'm aware of, they don't have a God that comes into human form to experience humanity, what it's like to be human, and then redeems them. It's they're other gods, and the religions are so like, I'm not going to deal with humans, but our God does. So that he understands, like, so the beauty, there's no emotion that we go through that Christ himself hasn't experienced. And so when we see that, like, wow, there's a person on the road, who is suffering, Christ has been in that situation. And if Christ was on the road, what would we do? We would rush to him, like, how can I help you, God? Like, what can I do? We would have love and we would have reverence for that embodied Christ. And I think that's what Jesus is saying, is like, have that same love for every person that you see. If you see me, and if you love me, you will love them the way I love them. Because Jesus loved me with, your whole heart, your entire being, love me but love others. Just love God. Love the God with our heart and soul, and love others as yourself. So we're third essentially in that equation. But if everyone were to love God and to see other people as God in them, and loves them that much, everyone will have their needs met. Those needs of being seen and respected and heard and cared for. I think that's what the poem is speaking to, is like, have that much love for someone else. And when you do, the things we could alleviate in this world. I mean, to put others before ourselves, people are so self-interested. And that causes a lot of, greed and pain and suffering and war and famine and disease. But if people actually really loved, imagine all the people who were in governments or in power really had that same passion for the people that they're supposed to serve, how different would our worlds be? How different would our communities be if they loved the other like they love, as they proclaimed they love Jesus?
Yeah. Well, Kelley, I'm glad people like you exist in the kingdom, and not only that you create that bridge between the so-called secular and the sacred, and you are there. Being a Christian in Pasadena Playhouse is much more difficult than being a Christian here at Lake Avenue Community Church. It's much easier on this side, but I'm glad you are on the other side and communicating this message and bridging the gospel and making it relatable to the other, which is your calling, and it is an incredible privilege to be around you. And just as a last question, are you working on any projects, or is there any dream project that you would like to do? And
well, I wrote like kind of an anthology of poems. They just kind of spewed out, and so I want to do something with that, whether it's an audiobook or recite or publish it or something. There's that, and then I'm also part of a theater group called Teatro Luna. It's a woman of color theater group ensemble cast, and we're doing a project, The Times, that deals with our own personal experiences as well as what's going on in the world currently. And so we're kind of, as so much has happened in 2020, and so we're re-envisioning what our piece looks like, sure. And which is really fun to do. And I think I've written other pieces that I kind of want to get back to at a one-woman show that my parents are heartily advocating that I do again, Love and Chocolate.
Where did you do that?
It was my senior thesis in college.
Oh, okay.
And then I've performed it in different, like Hollywood Fringe Festival and LaSalle High School and Alverno, and I did a show or two here at Lake Avenue in the small theater there. And so just being prayerful of and mindful of what the work I want to do and how is it at helping this time and what we're going through. Because I don't like doing things that feel irrelevant, of like, what is this, how is this helping people? How is this, moving forward and creating a more empathetic, loving world? I think to be determined, but there's still those are the projects that I'm currently working on.
Yeah. Thank you, Kelley. What a great way you summarized your own motto, in a way, empathetic, loving world, towards which you are directing your creative energy, which is amazing, which is inspiring. Thank you, Kelley, for joining us. And thank you, our audience. And I'm sure you will thank me for getting this privilege to meet Kelley. And there are a lot of amazing things to come from this young woman. And when you put on that show, Kelley, I want to be the one to buy the first ticket. Okay. So let me know.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you.